Oh, good morning again. It's so great to see all of you here, all of your beautiful smiling faces, and happy Valentine's Day, by the way, to you. Hope you had a very sweet and romantic kind of just week this last week with your special somebody. And so, just question for the fellas, or even for ladies too. But have you ever gotten your special somebody a gift that maybe they didn't get as much as you were hoping for? Maybe they didn't receive as well as you were wanting them to, or maybe it wasn't a home run like you were really expecting it to be. Have you ever had a moment like that? I really hope that, like, right now is not uncomfortable if last Thursday was that moment for you. But you see, a couple years ago when Aaron and I, actually more than a couple years ago, when Aaron and I, we were in high school and we were dating. I remember I was 15 and she was 16 at the time, and it was maybe our first, second, or third Valentine's Day. I can't remember which one it was, but anyway, it was one of our first Valentine's Day, and I remember kind of leading up to it, Aaron was sharing with me that she was really wanting to get some flowers. That it had been a while since she'd gotten a bouquet of flowers, and I tried to keep that kind of habit going in our relationship because it's something that she did, or that her dad did all the time for her, get her flowers. And so I wanted to keep that going, and so I remember she kind of been leaving me those subtle hints, right? Oh, those flowers look so nice. Right, guys, the subtle hints, right? Oh, don't those flowers look so sweet over there in the field as we're driving by, right? Oh, look at those flowers over there, right? So we're getting closer to Valentine's Day, and I'm like, all right, this is it. I'm going to get the best bouquet of flowers that Erin has ever been given in her entire life, right? And so as a 15, 16-year-old guy, I remember I kind of scraped together all the money I had. I had 120 bucks. I'm like, I'm going to get the best, the biggest, the fanciest, the craziest bouquet of flowers that she has ever seen. Her eyes are going to be like saucers, and her jaw is going to drop to the ground of tears. Tears are going to come flowing. Oh, Andre, thank you. Right, okay, that was my goal. That was my goal. And so I remember the day came that morning, and leading up to it, went over to a local floral shop, got the whole arrangement kind of picked out, and kind of just specialized. So I believe this would be, something that Erin would like. Picked out her favorite colors, and I remember, that day came, went over, picked it up that morning, and she was meeting me at my mom's house, and so she came down the driveway, and I had left the flowers inside, and so she got out of her car, and I remember I covered her eyes. I'm like, Erin, I have a surprise for you. Oh, okay, yeah, she loves surprises. Okay, so I kind of cover her eyes, and I walk her inside, and I'm just ready to see how just excited she is when she sees these flowers. And so I walk her inside, and we walk up to where they're sitting on the countertop, kind of picture maybe in your kitchen, these flowers sitting right there on the countertop, and I just kind of, voila, reveal. And sure enough, she loves it. I'm like, yes, like, right out of the park, like, whoo, like way out there. I thought, yes, I had got it. Whoo, this is a home run, way over the fence, right? This is the best. And she's like, oh, I love it. She's smiling, and she's smelling all the flowers, and she's looking. I'm like, all right, I did good, Come on, little pat on the back. Come on, way to go, Andre, not bad. And she looked at me, and she's like, Andre, where are we going to dinner? I was like, well, Erin, you see, I had spent everything I had on these flowers, and so I'm like, I know my mom has a frozen pizza in the freezer, so I was thinking we could make that. It's not delivery DiGiorno, but it's still amazing. You'll love it. And well, she was not a fan of that idea. And needless to say, it was great. It wasn't a train wreck of a Valentine's, but I certainly kind of set the baseline, right, for that one, that every time that we've had Valentine's together, I've tried to, at least pass that mile marker. Because although she loved the flowers, she did not enjoy having Valentine's Day with my mom. Having dinner, all of us together, the three of us. It was a little uncomfortable for Valentine's Day that one year. But maybe you have some funny stories with your spouse or with someone you're dating right now, where you kind of had those memories of, I remember that one time I didn't quite do so great with that gift. Yeah, but this morning I kind of want us to kind of center our attention around this idea of overcomplicating something. Because with the mistake I had made with Aaron at Valentine's is that I had overcomplicated, I'd over focused on the flowers and not so much on the other elements of Valentine's Day. I could have gone out into a garden and picked up some flowers for free and then spent less money on dinner. It would have been a win-win for everybody, right? But no, I had overcomplicated and overfocused and overdressed and thought way too much about this one specific thing, and it kind of didn't cause a train wreck, but it wasn't an enjoyable Valentine's Day. But friends, this morning I want to kind of focus our eyes in on something that maybe I believe that we've really started to overcomplicate. Just as last week we began this series called Unleashed, where we've been talking about ways that we really kind of want to let off the chain. We really want to unleash our calling and capacity to do things that we've been holding back from, that God is wanting us to be radical with. And so last week we talked about how God is inviting us to be just radical in our generosity and our calling to be people who tithe and are generous everywhere we go. And it was an amazing week last week because we felt encouraged in that way and realizing, kind of centering our eyes together on this calling that God has for us to not hold back, right? To not be afraid, but to step out in faith and do what God has called us to do. And this morning, I want us to come together in another way that we've been holding back. It's something that we know what we should do. It doesn't matter what our story is, whether we grew up in church or maybe this is our first time and we're just now coming back, or whatever our story is. This is something that we kind of know we should do, but we're kind of scared to. And the reality is, in the midst of our complexity that we've kind of drawn up for this thing, this calling that God has invited us to do, in the midst of overcomplicating it, we've burrowed ourselves in this cavity of anxiety and fear and insecurities and all of these worries when it comes to it. You see, friends, God has invited us to be witnesses, to be storytellers of our faith. More than just inviting people to church. More than just handing out an invite card or anything like that, or putting a door hanger on somebody in our neighborhood, but really being storytellers of what God is doing in our lives. Where we see how God answers our prayers, and we see how he helps us. God calls us to be witnesses. Understand that the idea of being a witness is somebody who's sharing the story of what God is doing. And so we kind of know that we should be doing that, but we're kind of afraid, right? Or am I just the only one who's feeling that way? We're kind of afraid because we're not sure how the person's going to take it. We're kind of afraid because we don't know if it's the right moment or not. We're kind of afraid because we don't know if really God's going to do anything with it. We're kind of afraid because we don't really have the right kind of words to share. So we kind of stack up this tall order of, I don't know if I can meet all these things. And so we end up overcomplicating the whole thing and missing out on an incredible, hear me friends, hear me, an incredible opportunity to be used by the God of our world, to be a vessel of his love, his grace, and his encouragement. Isn't it amazing? The God who created all of this, all of the world, right? If we could just hold a globe up. Should have brought a globe to church. If we could hold it up and see God created all of this, and even the galaxy that surrounds all of us, and he wants to use us as vessels, kind of doorways, windows, if you will, for people to see his goodness, people to see his love. And so the reality is God has called us to be witnesses, to be storytellers of his goodness in our world. And friends, this morning I really want us to become just a little bit radical with telling the stories of how God has helped us and what he's done in our life. You see, we're going to talk about this story of this woman, and maybe you're somewhat familiar with this woman. Her story is in John chapter 4, and so if you have a Bible with you, I encourage you to have it out. But also, too, just like in the past, if you want to take notes on your phone, I encourage you to use the YouVersion Bible app. And so Chloe's actually going to leave this up for a couple minutes, just so you can see the instructions on how to go through and use the app to take notes. But if you love being able to capture notes and just thoughts that come to mind when we're having our conversation together, I really encourage you to take advantage of this. I know maybe sometimes it's a little dark in here to write down something, but I really encourage you to take advantage of that tool. We see in this story in John chapter 4, this woman, she has this encounter with Jesus that radically changes her life. It's a popular story. And we're going to really kind of focus on the second half of the story, but I kind of want to just summarize the first part so you have a good idea of what we're talking about. You see, as Jesus and his disciples are traveling around from territory to territory, they're kind of going from city to city. They have to pass through this one area. And on their way, on their journey, going from one community to another, it's around lunchtime, and so they decide to take a break at this small village. And so Jesus leans up against a well outside the city. He doesn't go in. And they didn't have drive-through back then or Uber Eats, and so they actually had to go and get their food from the restaurant, from the market. And so just, Jesus sends his disciples, into the village. They begin getting lunch together for everybody. And as they're away, this woman comes out to the well to get some water, where Jesus is kind of reclining and relaxing at. And we don't know this woman's name, but the Bible calls her the Samaritan woman. And maybe this story is starting to ring a little bit of a bell. Maybe you've heard this as a kid, but the Samaritan woman, she comes out and she begins talking to Jesus. And Jesus asks her, hey, would you mind getting, me some water from the well? And she kind of just looks at him, right? They were of two completely different cultures, and their two cultures, a part of how they were supposed to, what they were both brought up being told, is that they could not socialize or be around each other at all. It was against all the rules to not talk to each other because you come from different sides of the tracks. And so she comes into this moment, and Jesus asks her for some water. And she's like, what? Why are you asking me? Like, you realize who you are and who I am. We can't even be talking. Let me just get my water, and I'll leave. And then Jesus kind of just looks right back at her and says, listen, if you knew who I was, if you knew the water I had, you'd ask me for some. And in that moment, she's looking him up and down like, I don't see a bucket. Like, what are you talking about? I have water that you've never seen, that you've never tasted, and it will satisfy the deepest part of who you are. It will fill the cracks of your broken heart, and it will satisfy the aching of your soul. And in that moment, he shares that with her, and then she kind of tries to change the conversation, and Jesus just kind of, he brings up, he's like, listen, I know your life. I know you don't have one husband, you have many husbands. That you've been sleeping around trying to find this satisfaction, but hear me. I have this water for you that will radically change your life. And then she starts talking about, how they're expecting this Messiah to come, the chosen one, the one who God was promising would come and change the world. And he says, I am that person. Wow. An amazing conversation that you have. And I encourage you to read it later on today. John chapter 1, verses 1 to 26. An amazing story. I encourage you to read that later on today. But we're going to pick up in verse 27 and continue on with the story, because in that moment, the disciples kind of re-enter the picture. They bring back the Chick-fil-A. They bring back McDonald's for everybody to enjoy. And then this is what happens. Let's read, starting in verse 27. Just then his disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. But no one asked, what do you want, or why are you talking with her? Then leaving her water jar, maybe take if you have your Bible, just underline that right there. Leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? They came out of the town and made their way towards him. Let's pause for a moment. Because right here in just these couple of verses, something powerful happens. As Jesus is there talking to the woman, and his disciples re-enter the scene, and they see he's talking to this woman. They don't say anything, and so she leaves behind her bucket, and she runs back into her village, and she begins talking to the very people who had actually rejected her in the first place. See, a part of her story is that she was an outcast, that she was a deserter, and even in her own hometown, nobody accepted her. And so there in that moment, Jesus offers and gives her this water that totally changes her life, and then she goes sprinting, leaves her bucket, goes sprinting back to her village, the very people who kicked her out, and says, this man told me everything I had ever done. Could this be him? The one we've been waiting for. Could this be the Messiah? Could this be him? Do you notice how there in that moment, how she doesn't just try to come up with some convincing arguments, or she doesn't begin a debate with anyone, or she doesn't just give some statements of fact of like, go listen to this man, he has some great things to say. No, she simply just begins to share her story of her encounter with Jesus. She just simply gives a description. I believe there in that moment she says a whole lot more than what we have written. She goes on to tell more of her moment, but I believe she goes on to her community and she begins to tell the story of her conversation with Jesus, and people's eyes kind of open and their hearts are stirred up a little bit and they're interested. You see, friends, one of the things I really want us to grab a hold of in this story and learn from this woman when it comes to sharing our faith and it comes to being storytellers of God's goodness is it doesn't necessarily require some heated debate or some big old argumentative kind of conversation or anything heavy in that way. It simply is us sharing the stories of the ways that God has helped us in our life. Like, it's that simple. That when God invites us to be witnesses, it's simply us sharing the stories of how God has helped us. For the times that we prayed for God to step in and provide. For what we asked him to please step in and help mend a relationship, or when the money was tight and he provided. Or we prayed for us to have kids and then God helped us get pregnant. Or when I needed a friend and then God brought me my best friend. I believe a lot of us have stories, and maybe we don't see much of the value behind them, but hear me, friends, they are big stories of God doing big things in your life. And they matter. And God invites us to share them. God invites us in so many moments to share these stories of what he's doing because it stirs up this curiosity inside people's hearts. They hear stories of God helping us or helping people, and people then wonder, I wonder if God could do that for me. I wonder if God could do that for me. Maybe God isn't this being who's far off in the distance, right, and wants nothing to do with us. Maybe he's more than just real. Maybe he's close. And he's still active and moving in our midst. A couple years ago, when I was in college, I had an amazing part-time job working at Lowe's. Woo! And I loved that job. Met so many different people through that job, and I remember, I worked there for like 3.5, 4 years, and I got moved all over the store, and I became friends with so many people, and so many of our customers. I remember there was one customer I became great friends with. His name was Kaya. He was older. He was in his 30s, and I was probably only 19 or 20 at the time. And I remember we became great friends, started talking about his projects and things that he had going on at his house. And then I volunteered, like, hey, can I come over and give you a hand? Like, Aaron and I were renting an apartment, and so I had this kind of fix inside of me to, like, do some repairs and some manly things with a hammer. And so I'm like, please, can I come over and help? And so just feed me lunch and we'll be good. And so I remember I got to go over to his home, and we had such a great friendship. I got to hear more about Kaya's story. And he got to share with me that him and his wife had moved to the States from Turkey only a couple years before. And they both had grown up in very conservative Muslim families. And they moved to our country to get away from their Muslim tradition and to get an education and start a family. And it's such an aspiration of starting a new life in our country. And his wife, she was going to school. She was finishing her master's degree to be a geologist. She was so smart. And then he owned an online palm reading business. I remember as we were getting to hang out and swing hammers and knock out walls, some manly stuff, we got to talk. And I remember I would begin to share with him about what God was doing in my life, and not being abrasive or anything like that, just simply sharing, hey, just the other day, I prayed for this, and you can guess what God did? He did this. He didn't believe in God. I shared these stories with him, and I remember even a few times he would ask me, Andre, are you trying to make me a Christian? It's like, no, I'm just telling you these stories. He's like, okay, you can keep telling me these stories. And sure enough, our conversation would go from plumbing and tile work and flooring to the Bible. And our conversation would go to Jesus. And he would ask me questions because these stories were stirring something up inside of him, although they were small, nothing crazy. And God was working inside of him. Now, he never came and visited our church, and I never had the great privilege of leading him to Christ. But I truly believe that God used me in that season to be such a great stepping stone on his journey towards Jesus. I hope now that God has brought another person into his life who is talking to him about Jesus and letting him know that God loves him and has something special for him through Jesus alone. Friends, our stories are powerful. Not just the big stories of having our lives completely turned around, but even the small stories of what God is doing and how he's encouraging us. They matter. They matter. They let people know that we're not just inviting them to church, not just inviting them to be a part of a country club, but we're inviting them into a space where they can meet with the same God of this world who brings about these miracles and these things in our life that don't make sense, that we prayed for and he delivers. They can meet with the same one who loves them and is able to be active in their life as well. So hear me, friends. Witnessing and sharing our stories is another layer, a whole nother layer to inviting people that we get to meet with the church. It's showing them that God cares, that he's not forgotten, that he cares about us, and he wants to work in our lives. Oh, it's amazing. I know you have stories. I know you have stories. Share the stories, and in the moment, I promise you, God will bring to light a story maybe to share. And friends, I love how in this story, how the woman leaves her bucket. She leaves behind her old life. She had so much shame, guilt. She had so much embarrassment. She had so much, I'm not good enough, dwelling up inside of her. And after meeting with Jesus, she left behind her bucket as she went back into her community. And the woman who was hopeless and full of shame was now a strong warrior of being a storyteller for God. Friends, are you holding on to any bit of shame from the past? Do you feel like God can't use you because you maybe have done too many things that you're not proud of? Listen, I promise you, if you've gotten your heart right with Jesus, he's removed that identity to where the shame is no longer bearing down on top of you, and he's called you now no longer an orphan, but a son or daughter of his own child. Realize that God has given you a new identity, and he's exchanged the shame of the past for a glorious present and future. But don't be afraid to share the stories of maybe the ones you're not proud of, because God has remade you. He's claimed your new identity and your new life. Don't carry around the bucket of shame from the past. Leave it where it belongs. And don't hold back from sharing the stories that maybe don't put you in too good of a light, but they put God in a great light. Don't rob God of his moments of showing his glory, of what he's done in your heart, how he's changed your life. Friends, share the stories of how God has helped you, and I believe truly you'll be able to begin to see your faith expand as God moves and works through you to impact other people through such simple stories that you share. And after that moment when the disciples come back up to Jesus and they bring the bag of Chick-fil-A or McDonald's, they come back up to Jesus. The woman leaves her bucket and she runs on back into her village. And it says that the people started to come out to Jesus. And there's actually a conversation that takes place before that next moment. We're going to read that conversation. When the woman leaves, Jesus then kind of looks to his disciples and he begins to talk to them. So we're going to continue reading the story. Verse 31. Meanwhile, his disciples urged him, Rabbi, eat something. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you know nothing about. Then his disciples said to each other, could someone have brought him food? Did that lady maybe bring him something to eat? Verse 34 says, my food, said Jesus, is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Don't you have a saying, it's still 4 months until harvest? I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest. Even now, the one who reaps draws a wage and harvests a crop for eternal life, so that the sower and the reaper may be glad together. Thus the saying, one sows, another reaps, is true. I sent you to reap what you have not worked for. Others have done the hard work, and you have reaped the benefits of their labor. So in this moment, Jesus kind of uses this analogy of farming and harvesting, and maybe kind of like me, I grew up a little bit in this city in Michigan, and so I didn't really grow up, farming and riding a tractor or much of that stuff. But maybe like me, you're kind of thinking, like, all right, I don't get any of this farming stuff. Like, what is Jesus trying to get at? And Jesus just shares this common saying, like, don't you have 4 months until harvest? Like you've sown the seed, and now you have to wait. Now it's the waiting game, waiting for harvest. You have that common saying among you. He says, listen, stop waiting. Now is the moment. And Jesus shares that illustration to show us that in every single chance that we have to share the stories of what God is doing in our lives, we need to seize the moment. We need to seize every moment to be a storyteller. That everything that comes up in front of us, to seize that opportunity to share a story. That doesn't mean in some very uncomfortable, awkward way, but when it seems natural and it seems like it's an opportunity, we should take that chance to be able to share a story of what God is doing. Friends, seize every moment to be a storyteller. I mean, you're thinking, well, Pastor Andrew, how do you know if it's a good moment? How do you know if it's a right moment? You said just share that, Aaron and I, we grew up in Michigan, and one thing in Michigan they have a lot of that we don't get the privilege of having here is that there are apple orchards everywhere. Like everywhere. Like apples are everywhere. I'm not even joking, like apples are everywhere. And apple-themed stuff is everywhere. Seriously, if you went there for vacation, you'd think we all crazy. Like, holy cow, these people like them apples. All right? But we love our apples up there. There are apple orchards everywhere. And as a regular routine of growing up as a kid, we went to apple orchards every year. Like school field trips, family getaways, weekends, we'd pick apples as a family, and it'd be a lot of fun. That was something that everybody did. It was normal, and we'd bring the apples back, and we'd make, apple cider or apple sauce or any of that stuff. My mom's applesauce, favorite stuff in the world. But we grew up going all the time to apple orchards, and every time you'd go, the workers there, they kind of would give you a lesson on how to pick apples. Very easy. They said, when it's red, pick it. It's easy. Sounds silly, but it's super easy to pick apples. They're one of the easiest fruit to pick because they switch from this pale green to red fairly quickly. Or they go through a short yellow stage, but they switch very quickly. So like, oh, it's red, it's ready to pick. Very, very, very seldom you get to see it, when it's like the right season. An apple is pale green, or like a mix between, like a blend. Like, is it ready? I don't know. It's obvious. Friends, in a very similar way, I promise you it's going to be obvious when the moment comes, when it's the right moment to share a story. It'll be obvious when it's not. If you're getting in an argument with somebody you work with and they're upset with you, it's not the right moment to talk to them about Jesus and what good things God is doing in your life. Not the best moment. But when you're sitting there at lunch with your coworker, maybe that's a good moment to share with him how God answered a prayer the other day. Or, hey, guess what God did the other day? I don't believe in God. I know you don't believe, but here, listen to what God did the other day. It doesn't make sense, but he is so good. good moment when you're standing in line at the gas station and you're maybe getting a drink or something like that as you're checking out, and you're the only one in the store, and maybe the clerk shares that they've been having a hard day. A good moment. Friends, there are good moments all around us. And a lot of the reason why they feel like they're seldom is because we've labeled them as maybe kind of moments. Like, oh, I don't think it's the right moment. I think it's a maybe. I don't know. It can go either way. No. Friends, hear me. We'll know when it's not the right moment. But if we're feeling maybe, I encourage you to grab a hold of that moment and to share a story maybe that God has put in your heart. When you're in conversation with somebody and you're just talking about life, and you're talking about your childhood, you say, yeah, I used to be a pretty rebellious person. And God changed me. You don't have to be crazy about it or over the top, but simply just sharing stories of, listen, this is God is doing. I'm not trying to cram it down your throat or be, like I said, over the top about it, but just sharing with you, this is what God is doing. Because, friends, I encourage you, if we seize every moment, not a single day will end and we'll have regrets. Because we'll regret if we turn away an opportunity, not if we take hold of one. We'll lay in bed that night with regret if we maybe said no to a chance where God was inviting us to say yes to share a story. We'll never feel regret if we always take and seize every opportunity, maybe if we even feel it's a maybe or on the fence. I encourage you, grab a hold of every opportunity and allow God to use stories from your past and even your present, big or small, what he is doing. Use those stories as windows for people to see his goodness and his rich love for us and his rich love for other people. Seize the moments. Seize every moment with someone you go to school with or someone you ride the bus with or somebody you sit down in a restaurant next to, whenever it feels just like a right kind of moment. And maybe you need to be asking God, can you help me discern? God, help me feel when it's the right moment. Because I want to be used by you as a storyteller of the faith. God, use me. Use me to help other people see your love and to just kind of put them as a nudge towards you as it stirs curiosity inside their hearts. Friends, seize every moment. You'll never regret it. I promise you that. You see, kind of next in the story, what begins to happen is after Jesus is wrapping up this conversation he has with his disciples, and they get to enjoy their lunch, maybe their chicken sandwich or their Big Mac. I don't know what they get to enjoy. But once they're done getting, you know what I like to eat all the time. That's kind of that's a big window into my personal life of what I eat for lunch. But if you can't tell, but in that moment they're wrapping up lunch, and then all these people from the village begin to filter into the moment. I want us to read the end of the story, and it's powerful. It's a great ending to this story of the Samaritan woman, how God uses her. So we'll read it, verses 39. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I had ever done. He told me everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed for 2 days, and because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, "We no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world." Wow. I wonder if Jesus knew. I wonder if he knew that conversation with that woman would lead into changing an entire village. I wonder if he knew, which is why he hung out at the well and didn't go in with his disciples to get lunch. I wonder if he knew that he'd take her from being an outcast to being a hero. in her village. That one day, that regular day, maybe another Tuesday or Wednesday, a regular day of the week, that she'd go out to get another bucket of water. Her life would be radically changed by Jesus. I wonder if he knew. See, friends, I love here at the very end of the story how all these people, hundreds, maybe even thousands of people, we don't know how big the village is, maybe even thousands of people go out to meet and talk to Jesus because this woman left behind her shame. She left behind her bucket, her old life, and embraced a new life as a child of God. I wonder if Jesus knew that would happen. And I wonder also, too, what really sparked people to want to go and meet Jesus? Because everyone in the village knew. Everyone already knew her story. Everybody knew who that was. Oh, that was so-and-so. She's that person, she sleeps around. You got to stay away from her. Everybody knew her story. And so she comes in and she says, this man told me everything I had ever done. It wasn't new news to anybody. Everybody knows what you've done. Come on. But I wonder what really sparked people's interest to go and meet with Jesus, to drop what they're doing and walk out to the well to meet this man. You see, I believe it was the genuine transformation that happened within this woman's life that made them think, wow, you really are a different person. Wow. You really are different. You're no longer walking around with this sense of hopelessness, but now there's this peace and this joy radiating inside of you. Who are you? And I wonder if that's the key to what intrigued hundreds and hundreds of people to go out and meet with Jesus, who then all of their lives were changed because of that woman sharing her story. See, friends, I really believe it is not just the words that we share in our stories, but it's the very walk that follows our talk that sparks more interest in people's lives, that points them towards God. That is our genuine self that leads people to seeing the genuine goodness of our amazing King. Friends, stay true to the stories you tell. May the stories of God's transforming love and his goodness that we share match the way that we live. And hear me, friends, this is important. I used to work with a lady, and maybe you know somebody who is like this. But I used to work with a lady, and she, whenever I hear her talking, she'd swear up and down and left and right. Every other word that would come out of her mouth would be a terrible word. She gossiped about so many people, and she never had anything nice to say, ever. She was always bitter. I remember one day I had the privilege of getting to talk to her, and I shared with her that I was a pastor, and she was like, really? She was like, yeah, I'm a Christian too. I love Jesus. I'm a part of this church right over here. And I'm like, really? Are you serious right now? Or are you making a joke? Really? Would people say that about you if you told them that you were a follower of Christ? Really? Wow, I would never have guessed. Hypocrisy is a stranger to no one. We've seen it. We've all seen it. We all know exactly what it looks like. The truth is we're guilty of it as well. Hypocrisy is a stranger to no one. And friends, we need to be on watch, on guard, on how we live. And that the manner in which we live really is bringing honor and glory to Jesus. That if the way we walk is truly matching how we're talking. Because yes, our words mean so much. But it's how we live that truly sparks this genuine interest inside of people to want to know the one that we've met, the one who's changed our hearts. Not just inviting people to church to be a part of a service, but to meet with the King of the world who's given me a new identity, who's erased my shame and guilt of the past, and has given me a new purpose and new direction and a new joy inside of me that gives me extreme amount of peace and motivation to pursue every single day. Friends, it's how we live that matters so much. Because the people we work with watch us. People we go to school with watch us. And listen, I want God to use you. I want you to experience the richness of being used by God. Because there's an overflowing amount of internal satisfaction that comes with being a vessel, that comes with being a storyteller of His goodness. There's so much richness that God just pours into our heart when we get to share a story of what good things God is doing in our life. It's rich, and it's meaningful, and it's filling, and it's satisfying, and I want you to experience it. But the thing is that hypocrisy is going to be a poison to your storytelling if you choose to live that way. And it doesn't matter how much you tell me you love Jesus, but if you're continuing to live in such a way that He doesn't want you to, then you don't live Him. You don't love Him. And who you are as a person is not leading others to Him. And I'm not trying to bring down the hammer or anything like that. I'm encouraging you. Listen, I believe in you. I believe in all of you. That you want to be used by God. That you want to help people. That you want to see people not just come to church, but you want to see people's hearts radically changed by the love of God. I know you want to see that. And so I encourage you to regularly put yourself in a position to hear God's voice speak to you and tell you if there's a behavior or a way that you may be living that doesn't honor Him, that He doesn't want you to. Or maybe that's tainting your witness in your workplace, in your school, or your sports team, wherever you're at. Because God wants to use you to change people's lives. And I encourage you to put your heart before His. Church, God wants us to seize every moment to share the stories of how He's helping us. He wants us to. So to see people's lives transformed by His love and His goodness. When I was in high school, many of you know my story of not growing up in church at all. And throughout most of my life, thinking that God wants nothing to do with us. Oh, sure, He's real, but He's way far off. It was nothing to do with me or with any of us. And when I got into high school and my family started visiting a church in our area, I became friends with this older man named Mike. At that time, he was in his 60s, and he was a hilarious guy. I remember when you sit down and talk with Mike, it'd be the most refreshing conversation you'd ever have. You have people in your life who are like that, where you sit down and you talk to them, and it's refreshing, right? I love being around those type of people. I hope that I get to be one of those people. Don't you love people who are like that, who are so encouraging and uplifting? Mike was like that. And he would always be quick. He'd always be quick to tell you that he lived a life that he's not proud of. That as a 60-some-year-old guy, that he had made more decisions that he now regrets than ones that he's proud of. Decisions of alcoholism and things with his wife and other people and so many things that he regrets. That he wished more than anything that he could change. But he was so quick to tell you how much God has changed him. He was so quick to talk about God's love and how God had radically changed his life. He'd say, God is so good that He would even reach to the bottom of the barrel to scrape me off and bring me to the surface so that I can have a new love and a new life in my heart and my soul. That God would pick me up from the bottom and shake me off and have a new life. How good and loving God is that he would do that even for me, somebody who definitely does not deserve it. I remember through all my conversations with Mike, I started to think that maybe God could do something for me. That maybe God can do something with all of the pain that was in my heart from my parents' divorce and through moving around and through all the anger I had sitting inside of me. Maybe God could do something for me. And he could take care of the pain that's inside of me that's lodged like a boulder. Maybe you could take care of the anger and the hatred that's boiling. Maybe God could help me. And Mike wasn't the man who got to lead me in my prayer of accepting Christ. But he was one of the men that God used who had the biggest influence in me in my journey towards Jesus. And it breaks my heart that he recently passed away from an accident, because I know God used him and his story to help so many people. Friends, you want to leave a legacy? Tell the story of what God's doing in your life. You want your story to carry on. You want your name to carry on way beyond you into your kids, into other people's life. To tell the stories of what God is doing in your life. Be bold and do not hold back and do not be afraid. Grab a hold of every moment that comes in front of you, because you have no idea what kind of impact it can have. Because Mike had no idea what kind of impact his stories would make on me. That later accept Christ and then moved to South Carolina to plant a church. Oh. Friends, hear me. We have no idea the impact of our stories. You have no idea if you're talking to a single mom who cries all the time because she's terrified of providing for her kids and she doesn't know how it's going to happen. Maybe through your stories of telling her how good God is and how he provides, you'll be able to lean on and depend on God. And maybe there's a young man who you're talking to, or maybe there's a guy around you who you'll share a story with, and you have no idea that behind the scenes he's thinking about suicide. You have no idea. You have no idea the stories of what you'll share and how God will use you and all the influences in the circles of your life, of what God could do with them, and the seeds you'll plant, and the people who will be nudged just a little closer to God. Friends, hear me. Be storytellers. Be radical storytellers. Let's see what God does. Will you pray with me?